Thank you, everybody, for attending Career Conversations this evening. We are happy to have with us Hoby Wedler, and Hoby is blind and has a PhD in organic chemistry. Hoby will be sharing with us this evening his journey through school and life and the world of work. Thank you for joining us, Hoby.
Lori, Richard, Katie, and the whole APH community. It's an honor to be on Career Connect. I really enjoy this opportunity, and I'm excited to have a little fireside chat over the next hour or so.
Great. So, why don't you begin telling us a little about what organic chemistry is for the people who may not know, and also maybe what you might do just in general. What are some areas that people might work in?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that question. So, I wear a lot of different hats. One of which was to obtain a PhD in organic chemistry. Organic chemistry, in its most basic terms, and I don't mean basic as in basic versus acidic, I mean basic as in most fundamental, is the chemistry of molecules containing carbon. So to be organic, you have to have carbon. So pretty much all the molecules, other than water, of course, that make us up, happen to have carbon in them. Most drug molecules, pharmaceuticals that we might take are organic molecules. Organic chemistry is the study of fuels that run our cars. This is June 6th of 2024, and I am a space nerd, and this morning we were able
Ah,
to watch the
yes.
the Starship crew version iteration 4 take off and go into sort of a transorbital mission that was rocket launched with millions of pounds of methane. And methane is one of the simplest organic compounds you can get. It is carbon attached to four hydrogens, CH4. And what can one do with organic chemistry? That is a big question, and the scope is wide. And I'll just give a few examples here. Number one, you can teach. You can go into research and or teaching, and that's usually called academia. So you can go into the teaching world. You could go teach high school if you wanted. You could go work in an industrial job making molecules, making different organic compounds. One of the major fields of organic chemistry is organic synthesis. So when we pull crude oil out of the ground, we turn it into all sorts of different things. Maybe you take aspirin. Aspirin comes from the bark of a willow tree, and
Hmm.
it effectively was discovered to be an analgesic, something that removes or soothes pain. But we couldn't just harvest a bunch of trees because aspirin became very, very popular. So we had to figure out how to make it in the lab. And today, millions and millions of tons per year of aspirin are produced. And this is true with many, many, many other molecules. Aspirin is just a very fundamental example. I thought I wanted to teach, and we'll get more into that in a while, but I went into food science and the science of flavor. I have trained myself to have a really good palate, which has nothing to do with organic chemistry. But then I said, hey, why don't I pair my love of food and drink, hence your code, and maybe, and my love of organic chemistry and work as a product development expert in the food and beverage industry, focusing on wine and spirits, but definitely in the food and beverage industry overall. So I hope, Lori, I gave a decent sort of breadth of what organic chemistry is and what one
Yes.
might do with it.
Great. So now, if you could tell us a little about your blindness and maybe um, how you became interested in chemistry.
Yeah, I was born totally blind. My parents had no idea that my blindness was a thing until I was born. I've never had light perception, and my blindness is actually not caused by anything genetic. It is a condition called microphthalmia, which literally translates to tiny eye. So my left eye was very, very small and didn't work. My right eye was very large and had to be enucleated when I was a few days old. And yeah, so I use bilateral prosthetic eyes right now. And that's a little bit about my blindness. did I get interested in chemistry? I think I share a lot of common views on this and common experience on this with probably others listening in. Um, I fell in love with chemistry because of a great high school chemistry teacher who made chemistry exciting. It was interesting. I decided to test into honors chemistry which was a junior level class, and as a sophomore, I had to take a test to see if I even qualified for it. And I think the instructor might have been expecting me not to do so well on the test and make it really easy by not qualifying for the class. Um, and, one thing led to another, and I got one of the high scores on the test, and the instructor just said, wow, we'll figure this out. So we worked together to figure out an excellent way for me to study organic chemistry and perform lab experiments safely with an assistant who had taken the class 1 year before me. And what was interesting though is the instructor would tell the class as a whole, you guys should study chemistry. We live it, we breathe it, we eat it, we drink it. It's all around us, and it's one of the most fundamental sciences. That annoyed the physicists, but that's what she said. And it was to me, it was like, yeah, I want to take chemistry beyond the prerequisite that it might be thought of as, the gateway class to whatever anyone really wants to study. I wanted to study chemistry, and I had dreams of teaching chemistry. And she would tell me privately, "Yeah, you're blind. I just don't think chemistry is practical for you to study." And I remember I knew that I had to try to change her mind. I was 16 years old at the time, and I figured out how I was going to do it. It was a cold January morning, the second week of the second semester, and I knew she was prepping for the day and wouldn't have students in her classroom yet. It was early in the morning. So I walked upstairs in the science wing steps to her classroom and went in and said, I understand that you feel like chemistry is not practical for me to study, but I don't see a reason why I shouldn't, because nobody can see atoms. And chemistry is a cerebral science. And from that day, she's been one of my strongest allies, and still to this day, we're excellent friends, and I still consider her a wonderful mentor. And that's how I got excited about chemistry.
That's great. And I have to say I love your descriptions of chemistry. I took a class in college called consumer chemistry, partly because I'm
Yeah,
not very intelligent in the areas of math, and I didn't want something that I was going to really struggle with. And it's so true. Chemistry is such a part of everything we do.
it is. It really
Um,
is.
are you a Braille reader?
Absolutely. I am an avid Braille reader and really wouldn't have it any other way. I think it's so important to have a system that we all are literate in.
Yes, I couldn't imagine doing anything in the realm of chemistry with writing out equations and formulas and those type of complex things without anything like Braille. You know,
And
if that's what you happen to need, yeah.
the Braille code of chemical notation is a wonderful
Hmm.
code. I used it some for organic chemistry, where you can literally draw out molecular structures using Braille characters. I also worked with a lot of assistants and would draw figures out just by having them draw much larger than the figure would appear, using all capital letters that were properly separated so I could feel them, and then flip the paper over thick sort of laser printer paper and trace out the letters. And then I would take those images and annotate them with Braille, because a lot of organic chemistry is puzzle solving and fitting little pictures together.
Mm. Yeah.
But definitely in undergraduate chemistry, quantum mechanics, inorganic chemistry, analytical chemistry, all that was done on the Braille writer. And to get a chemistry degree, you really have to study math all the way up to advanced differential equations. And there is no way that I could have taken math without understood differential equations and calculus and all
Hmm.
these things without having an innate understanding of Braille and being able to use Braille as my tool. And I know I sound old when I say this, but I still think there's nothing quite like a 1950 Perkins Braille writer for solving math and science problems.
I have one sitting here to my left, so
I'm glad to hear you say that.
I um I have to say I really like your technique of using a student who took the class. Um, a semester or a year before.
Yeah.
And that was in high school that you did that?
It was in high school, and what's funny
That's
is that I
fabulous.
took that trick with me to college.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go from, as many students know, when you go from high school to college, you really go from having teachers of the visually impaired doing a lot of the advocating for
Right?
you to needing to do 100% of the advocating for yourself. And that's an area, by the way, where I feel so honored to have had the parents who I had. My mom was a TVI actually as I was growing up. She took on that profession because of my blindness.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing to have a resident TVI right at the house. And
Yep.
but both my mom and dad just said, look, you're gonna have to start advocating for yourself early on, because if you don't, you're gonna be a fish out of water when you get to college. And boy, were they right. And I would, in high school, all the way through high school, I worked with my TVI, who was never my mom, by the way, someone in the same department, but different people over the years. And I would, if as long as it wasn't an exam, I would be responsible for getting all handouts and everything from instructors that needed to be brailled. And I was responsible for getting them to the TVI and getting them transcribed. So you got to start before it's time that you have to do things completely on your own, is my opinion.
Yeah.
And being able to advocate for myself and gather materials I need in an accessible format, and knowing how to travel and clean and cook for myself and live independently were the most important skills that allowed me to go to college and thrive.
Great. Thinking back on the using an assistant while you were in high school and also afterwards in college, um, do you think that that really helped you, like the skills that you got in high school, did that in turn then help you in college? And how did you
Oh,
develop the ability to maybe ask questions to the assistant that you were working with? Do you remember how that may have come
yeah.
about?
Yeah, I can tell you very specifically, actually. First of all, definitely what I learned in high school about working with assistants, I took with me to college. And we're going to talk about this, I think, a little bit later. But the best way, in my opinion, and I have very strong opinions here, the best way to work with an assistant is to make it fun for them to work with you and make it fun for you to work with them so that everybody gets something from the relationship. Oftentimes I hear about folks working with assistants and kind of bossing them around and telling them what they need. And when it's not fun for the assistant, the pay isn't always great. I would often supplement
Mm-hmm.
the pay of my assistants. And if the pay isn't great and you find someone really good, you need to make it fun and make it mutually beneficial for everybody involved. And how did I learn to ask questions? That actually started at a very young age. I was so curious about how things looked around me, about how things operated, how pieces of equipment worked, how plumbing worked, how electricity worked. So I was kind of this curious
Mm-hmm.
scientist. And that led me to just, for lack of a better word, ask a lot of questions, but figure out the questions that were most relevant. And one of the tricks that I used is I would always let the assistant finish what they were explaining, finish their explanation, and then ask a question, because I realized that sometimes when I would interrupt and ask questions, it would be coming up in just a second in their explanation.
Mm-hmm.
But along the lines of asking questions, Lori, and this is of utmost importance in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and math of any kind, don't be afraid to ask questions in class. And when the high school teacher or professor writes something on the board or has something on their slides that they gloss over without really saying, stopping them and saying, "Hey, what was that? Can you go back a little bit?" And I would do that with assistants as well. It was so incredibly important, because what I realized from my peers is that, hey, that little bit of slowing down is exactly what they needed too. I can't tell you the number of people who approached me who were in my classes and said, by slowing down, you feel you made it easier for all of us to learn. And I always like to think that I never like to do anything for accessibility for just me. If we're going to do it for me, or we're going to do something for me, it should help everybody. blind or sighted or otherwise, and really took that to heart. The last thing I'll say academically, and this is true for anyone, whether you're studying academics, whether you're, taking a class at a JC, trying to learn vocational skills, whatever the case may be, if there's a textbook or any sort of reading that goes along with what you're learning in class, I can't advocate enough for doing the reading before the class takes place. So that when you go to class, if the instructor teaches from the reading material roughly, the lecture feels like review after you've read the book.
Yes.
So important.
Yeah. I think it's very true, and I totally agree with you. And I I think the working with assistants really helps you communicate not only in college and high school, but also in the world of work, because it
It
helps you
does.
be able to ascertain from people what information do I need,
Yeah.
and being patient and
Well,
waiting for them to describe something, because they just may have another way of getting to what you need to know. And
exactly.
yeah.
And what's interesting about that too, that I just want to add a little uh, corollary to that, if you will, is that your assistant knows a lot of things, or you know a lot of things that your assistant doesn't know either. So letting them ask you questions and learn from you is a really fun way to do things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So originally, while you were in college, and also for a little while after, I believe you were teaching chemistry. Um,
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about that experience? What was it like for you as teaching a bunch of sighted people how to use chemistry
Yeah.
as a professor who was blind, and,
Yeah.
maybe a little bit about both the classroom and lab experience?
Yeah. So the thing that I always knew is that I didn't want to teach upper division undergraduate chemistry or graduate chemistry. I wanted to teach freshman chemistry. I wanted to make this science that so many people thought of as boring, as exciting to my students as it was for me, as it always has been and always will be for me. And I wanted to make a Monday morning lecture at 8 a.m. after a long weekend of college partying fun for my students. And it's probably the hardest type of chemistry to want to teach as a blind person because the students like to learn by looking at things. They don't necessarily speak chemistry yet. And
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly what I found is that I was spending a lot of my time and money, frankly, working with assistants to make my lecture materials very accessible to my students, which made them quite inaccessible to me because my students wanted little videos of, molecules reacting and little animations and photos. And they literally wanted the instructor to say, so you take these things over here and you combine them with this and you get these things because they didn't necessarily speak chemistry, but they could see with their eyes what was happening. I never did that. I always spoke true chemistry and explained things to them clearly, but they really wanted um, more visuals, more sort of more at their level. And I realized then that maybe I didn't want to teach chemistry for a living because it was doing chemistry, studying chemistry, and thinking about chemistry is totally in your mind, right? So for me, the hardest parts of teaching chemistry and interacting with the research community, as any graduate student would do, were not doing it was not doing the chemistry itself, but really taking information from the research or from the textbook that I was teaching from or from online resources and making them accessible to me, getting them into my head somehow. And once I have them in my head, doing the teaching or doing the chemistry is easy, but then getting the information from my mind back out to the visual world was very challenging. So that was lecture. And I'll tell you in lab, I always worked with another fellow graduate student as an assistant who would be my eyes and watch over what was happening in lab. But just like what I would do as a student, I did as an instructor. I would make sure that me and my assistant both fully understood, or my assistant and I should say, fully understood the lab materials that we were going to be teaching. We understood the safety risks and how we needed to explain the safety to our students. And I did this in a very particular way. I would always sit down And if it was a procedure that I was writing, I would write it and make sure that we read it aloud together so that I
Hmm.
knew that we both had it in our minds rather than sending it to the assistant and saying, can you read this and internalize it? I really took the time, and I think it's so important that I did this. I really took the time to help my assistants understand, make sure they understood with me. So we were together and we came up with a game plan every time, whether it was a procedure that I wrote for the lab or a procedure from a standard lab manual. So that's actually, I don't know if you're here still, Lori, kind of
Yep.
audio cut out a little bit. Are you there? Okay.
Yep. I'm here.
That is actually that is actually why I moved into the world of food and beverage product development, is because I realized that teaching, while exciting and fun and all that, was not as accessible as I thought it should be. And I could use my chemistry and my ability to teach in plenty of other areas.
Great. So nice segue because my next question here is there anything that you'd like to share regarding the academic side of either teaching or being a student before we move on to your entrepreneurship?
Yeah, the most important thing is to not take everything so seriously that you drive yourself crazy by academics. That's number one. Um, the two single most important skills that I'm going to say three most important skills I learned to be successful in college are in no particular order. Number one, the ability to travel and live independently and productively and healthily. Number two, the ability to speak and communicate verbally. And number three, the ability to write. You got to know how to write. You got to know how to talk to people, and you got to know how to travel and live your life independently and as healthy as possible. Those are so incredibly important to success. And the other one is make it fun for everyone involved, your professors, anyone who's assisting you. Make it enjoyable, and you have the power to make working with you either really frustrating and irritating or a lot of fun. And people like fun. And it's not goofy fun, but I would go into my professor's offices and they would be scared because they had a blind student, and the Office of Disability Resources would send them a letter saying, oh, Hobie's blind and this is how you need to accommodate him and all these, legal things. And they'd get scared of that. How the heck am I going to teach a blind student
Hmm.
math or chemistry? And I would say, hey, you are here to teach me chemistry, and I'm here to teach you how to teach a blind person.
Hmm.
So it's a collaborative relationship.
Yes.
Always be a collaborator
Yeah.
and never be an adversary.
Yes. Great. I love your wisdom here. You frequently comment that your skills that you use in the field of orientation and mobility kind of parallel with the skills that you use in chemistry. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, this is one of my favorite topics and favorite questions to think about, especially among blind friends. You all know how especially if you don't have any eyesight, maybe light perception or worse,
Hmm.
we have to imagine the way streets connect, and we can work with orientation mobility instructors to do that. We have to imagine, how to get from point A to point B and where the buildings are and where the landmarks are and how the streets connect. And what I realized, because I fell in love with organic chemistry, which is totally strange because it's by far the most visual form of chemistry out there. And I realized I was building models and working with an assistant to draw out all sorts of molecular structures, and they just fit into my mind and made sense to me. And I realized that I was using the same skills, and I think, and this is something I'm going to study, I'm certainly going to study this before my career's done. Um, I feel like I use the same part of my brain to study and ponder complex organic chemistry that I use for my travel and my survivor, excuse me. I use the same part of my brain to think about complicated organic chemistry that I use for my survival as a blind traveler. And we all know this skill that we have of mentally walking from one place to another. So all the time when I'm laying in bed, when I'm not,
Mm.
using my mind for other stuff, I will think about, okay, how do I want to do that route? What went well? What didn't go well? Let me think about that one building, that one intersection, that one confusing point. Right, and we're just imagining the streets and imagining our trajectory along those streets. And it's in our mind, right? It's in our head. And
Right.
we do the same thing as organic chemists. Oftentimes sighted folks use a piece of paper as a crutch and a pencil as a crutch, but we're molecules that none of us can see. So for me, thinking through the reagents that I would use and the reaction mechanism I would employ, basically reaction mechanism meaning where electrons are going to cause one thing to turn into another. Walking from where I sit right now in my home office to the local market downtown is not that different than thinking about how to add a chlorine atom to a benzene ring. It's kind of the same, not the same steps, but the same mental process. And this is where I think, as blind folks, we have a gift in the sciences because why not turn distances of kilometers and meters into angstroms and nanometers and think about molecules and atoms and how they connect to form molecules the same way we think about streets and the way they intersect to form a city or town. But we can also take those meters and kilometers and turn them into light years and use our same way of imagining things and understanding the world to be great astronomers and cosmologists.
Great. Fabulous. Um, so you are now doing entrepreneurial things that you
Yeah.
thoroughly enjoy in various areas. You have is it pronounced Wedland?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
A combination of
Group.
my last name Wedler and my business partner's name Vallandingham.
Ah, okay. And so could you tell us a little about what does Wedland Group do and
Absolutely.
how does chemistry come into that?
Absolutely. So for me, I've always been an entrepreneur. And let me just step back a little bit and say that sometimes when people don't know our the true essence of what we can do. We've all been in the situation where we walk into a job interview and it might be the second or third interview and people see your cane or your guide dog and they just don't take you seriously. Or they immediately get scared of the liability of hiring someone who loves working for myself. And to me, entrepreneurship is not about money. It's about solving problems and making life easier and making the world a little bit of a better place than we left it. So starting when I was 7 years old, I had a little business in my neighborhood taking trash cans out to the curb on the what I called garbage eve, which is the night before garbage day,
Love the term.
and pulling them back
That's
in
great.
on after they'd been serviced. The cans had been serviced, and people would of course compensate me for doing that work, but I was actually helping them. And a lot
Yes.
of my clients were older folks who didn't necessarily have the means or the desire to walk up and down their steep driveways hauling their trash bins. So that was a great way for me to for me to start my entrepreneurial journey. And I loved it because yeah, I was making a little bit of allowance, but I was also helping people. And that's exactly how I think of my work now. I'll just tell you about a couple of our initiatives in my entrepreneurial life. The way that I involve teaching is that, ironically, concurrently with when I was finishing undergraduate school, excuse me, and starting graduate school, I got a call from the filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola. He made films like The Godfather and Apocalypse Now and
Yep.
whatnot. And he said, "Hey, I want to do a blindfolded tasting that isn't gimmicky, that doesn't use the blindfold as a game or anything like that, that just highlights the elements of wine in a way that's different than maybe we do when we're tasting as a sighted person. I got your name from a friend. Is this something you want to build for me?" I said, "Sure." And when Francis Ford Coppola calls you and says, "Will you do this for me?" You say yes, and then you hang
Of
up and you
course.
freak out about what you just agreed to. But it was incredibly fun for me. I built this experience that was not at all based around trying to. I have mixed feelings about dining in the dark, where people are in a dark room or wearing a sleep shade and then asked to use a fork. If you've never used a fork before when you're blind, you're going to be so challenged that it's not going to be, it's just going to be about, wow, I don't know how you do this. I couldn't do it. Well, of course you couldn't do it. You've never done it before, right? So I take that sort of gamifying factor out of it where, you're a hero if you don't spill on yourself, because I think that's a little bit demoralizing personally. And I use the blindfold just as a way to take away a sense that we use to obtain 85 to 90% of the information from our surroundings and focus in on our other senses that we typically only use to take in 10 to 15% of our surroundings, for about an hour, to take in 100% of our surroundings. And we've done this experience with wine as we started, but it's expanded greatly to a variety of markets of food and spirits and beer and oil and vinegar all around the world since then. So that's how I teach. And I don't only teach people how to enjoy flavor and aroma and texture, but I teach them how to home in and relax their other senses when their eyesight is removed, and how they can think about the world differently and take these experiences into their everyday life, not necessarily to blindfold themselves all the time by any means, but to just remember this calm and this way that they paid attention that they never used before. And it takes something that might be a product in a catalog and makes it an experience that people can remember and talk about and tell their people they know, friends, family, and the like, about for years to come. Oftentimes I meet people where I've performed a tasting experience and they were in the group 15, 20 years ago and they still, oh, I remember you. So that's how, and I remember that experience. It was so enlightening. That's how I employ teaching. I do a little bit of chemistry work there in the way that I design my tasting experiences. Pardon me, just getting some good old water. But I mainly use organic chemistry in my work as a product development expert. My business partner, Justin, and I travel the country developing products for our clients. We just got back from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where we left this morning, where we're working on a strawberry and a peach whiskey for our client, having a really good time building those products and working in that area. We're building a lab for a large distillery out of just outside of Shelbyville, Tennessee, and designing a very innovative new product for them. And we're also doing some work, some design work in the wine industry, some competitive set work, so helping people figure out when they should mail their wines in to be scored and reviewed, and why, by knowing what the reviewers like and don't like.
Mm.
Done a lot of work in beer, a little bit of work in product development in the food side of things. I also have I'm a weirdo that loves science, but also loves marketing. So I opened a company called SensePoint, and I'm a partner of that company back in 2019. SensePoint is a PR communications and marketing firm that basically works only with nonprofits that help folks with disabilities. And we just like to amplify their message. Now's a good time to say that, and I really encourage folks to, and Richard, if you want to put this in the chat, please. I have a podcast. Actually, I host a podcast that we do all the marketing communications for the national industries for the blind, called Heard and Empowered. And Heard and Empowered is all about getting employment, finding employment opportunities, both in the Ability One program and outside the Ability One program in corporate America. And that is truly a highlight of my career, is hosting this podcast. And I encourage everybody listening to go check it out and see if it's for you, because to me, it's a really fun show where we highlight individuals and we really talk about policy that we're developing, how to build the workforce of blind and low vision folks, et cetera, et cetera. So that's some of the work that we do in the marketing side. We also work for Lighthouse for the Blind of San Francisco. They're a major client, among others. And finally, we're working on a startup company now with some partners out of Italy, with an office in Bolzano, Italy, all around designing high-end products and experiences. And instead of asking people, hey, do you like this? Do you like that? Yes, no, whatever. We use ways to understand neurologically how they're reacting. So machines called electroencephalographs, which just set like a helmet right on top of the head.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
So
fascinating.
we're doing some fun stuff. That's just a little bit of a very tightly woven tour of my entrepreneurial journey. And I could go on for that,
I'm
for hours about
I'm
that. But
sh I'm sure
all
you
this stuff
could.
ties back and harkens back to chemistry and the fact that I would be doing none of this if I didn't have the street cred, so to speak, that maybe a
Mhm.
PhD in organic chemistry gives you.
Great. Well, looking at our time here,
I have
um,
a question.
go, go ahead,
Or,
Richard.
or were you gonna go to the
No,
audience, or
no,
did
I
you
was
do?
just going to ask him if he had anything he
Sure.
wanted to share, and then
Yeah,
we
no,
could move
go.
on to you and
Yeah,
Katie and the
go ahead.
audience.
Yeah, no, completely. Hope you have anything to share before we go to Katie and I and the audience.
Yeah, I do actually. And I'm really excited to share these things with you. Um, I want people in every respect of their lives to have a positive mindset. The more positive our mindset is, the more we can get done. You can do anything that it is that you want to do as long as you focus on it and put your mind to it. And I believe that when we challenge ourselves, when we push ourselves even just a little tiny bit to do something we maybe haven't done before, the results are absolutely incredible. And we feel so much success and we can move forward and boost ourselves on that success. And if we fail or make mistakes, well, that's great too, because we can learn from those mistakes. But
Yeah.
the most important thing is to remember a positive mindset is everything. And if you can just hold on to that, I can do what I want to do. My brain is the only thing in my way, and my brain is also the biggest helper. That's going to help you win.
That's great.
Let's do some questions.
All right. So, Hobie, I won't take too much of your time because I do want to hear what our audience has to say, but I've known you for a good 20 years. I think I first ran across you at Enchanted Hills, and
Indeed.
I was a rehab counselor, and you were just up and coming. And all of a sudden, here you are doing these presentations, of which I've been to many. I've done some wine tasting with you up in Napa at
Right.
Enchanted Hills. You've done many presentations at like the 7 or 8 jobs I've had since I've known you, and I'm
Mhm.
thankful for that. And you made chemistry accessible. You made it fun. All those things you did with our students. I'm so glad to know you and know that you've done this. But you
It's
had said
mutual,
something.
Richard. I'm glad to know you.
Yeah, thank you. You had said something earlier that really resonated with me, and advice I wish I had 35 years ago when I was going to high school and college was you got to talk to people, you got to communicate, you got to write, and you got to have good travel skills. I learned that on my own in college. I wish I had that in high school. Do you think with being so immersed in technology, social media, braille displays, all the technology that kids and young adults have today versus that you and I had 20, 30 years ago, do you think it's have you seen, do you know blind students struggling more with so much information, or you think they're better off today? And not that,
I,
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Richard, I think that's a great question. And the answer to that I would give is very complex. I might sound like an old fogey when I say this, but I don't use a GPS when I'm traveling because it distracts me and I
Mm,
rely
I
too much
agree.
on it. I don't like it. I don't like things squawking in my ear. And I also feel like when we are so self-reliant on something like that,
Yeah.
we lose our ability to listen to traffic and to read
Hmm.
traffic. And I know there are plenty of people teaching algebra on braille displays, but there's nothing like writing with your pencil. And my pencil is a good old-fashioned Perkins Braille writer. They make fancy electronic ones where you don't have to press the keys down as hard. But guess what? I want to be able to use my pencil and there's no power in a log cabin and there's
Hmm.
nothing else going on. And that's my Braille writer. And I think the technology is good, things like Chat GPT's photo recognition. I don't know if you're familiar with Be My AI, but
Oh
it's the
yeah.
Hmm.
I
it's
love
the
it.
Be My Eyes virtual volunteer. It's pretty amazing.
Yes.
But and I think it's very cool that tech is coming this far. But I think I'm speaking for everybody, not just those of us who are blind, when I say social media takes away our ability to communicate. And I think that's such a shame.
Mm.
That's what I was getting at. And I
And
thank
it
you for,
does. It makes it so that we have a hard time stating a point. It's easier to write it as a comment or put an emoji or something like that. We have to learn to use our words.
We do. And in a way, I wish I had the technology that we have now going in high school, but at the same time, I'm glad I didn't, because it taught me to communicate and really be on my toes and be a better self-advocate. So I think it's a double-edged sword, and it's how you're influenced by it and supported by it, by your teachers, your elders, your mentors, your parents. Let's rock and
1,000%.
roll. I know Katie's got a couple of questions just ready to go.
Yeah, well, first, just
Or
thank
did you have a
for,
question? I'm sorry, Katie.
I mean, I have lots of questions, but we don't have all the time. So, but no, I think it's really cool. We had some comments here about, in the chat about how, one thing that you said that really stood out to me, and that someone else kind of alluded to with their comment, was, the mental mapping that we do. And yes,
Yeah.
I do it too, and I don't even think about it, but
Right.
I mental map everything, or I
Yeah.
seem to. But that, relating that to chemistry was really powerful for me, because as someone who took chemistry in high school, and basically, really didn't have it in an accessible way other
Right.
than to kind of memorize the periodic table. And, that means,
Sure.
it means something, but it means nothing to me today personally. To have that, though, to really think of it in that way, I think gives a whole new perspective for students to think about. And so I would just, I think that's really crucial to not just think, oh, I'm a blind person, I can't do chemistry, because it
Right.
is so visual. To
Right.
really look at it from, what skills do I have that I can bring
Mm-hmm.
to the table. That's powerful.
The only reason things like chemistry are thought to be visual is because that's how society wants us to think about them. Because for
It's how
centuries
they do them.
past, and for centuries
Right.
past, it's how we represent findings from those sciences is visually,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
but they don't have to be, nothing has to be visual, except for maybe driving. And I think we see big changes there. So no,
Eventually, someday. Yes.
we can make everything non-visual.
Yeah. And I think, someone really said in the chat, like, you could really empower students to discover chemistry and others that hadn't given it a thought. So
Sure.
that's very cool.
And we did what Richard was alluding to, is we've done many chemistry camps over the years, because I feel like, hey, I've gotten all this access and chemistry is fun for me and I excelled in it. Why don't we do chemistry with other students? So that push come to shove there. And, we've done dozens of chemistry camps, some day-long camps, some, weekend-long camps, even some for a few days, almost a week. And we find the same thing. Students leave saying, I didn't know I could do that.
Yeah.
And it's just fun. It just
You don't have
tickles
any for
me.
adults, do you? I'd love to go to chemistry camp.
Yes, we can do one. Hey, let's do an APH adult chemistry camp.
I like it.
That'd be awesome.
Let's
Yeah.
do it. Katie, I'm keeping you honest there. Let's do it. Let's plan it.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And I know you touched on this briefly earlier about your decision to kind of stop teaching at
Yeah.
the college level, but it sounds like in your business setting, you're still teaching,
I am.
if I may, just in a different way, right?
I
You're still
couldn't live without teaching.
Yeah.
I have so much passion, not for being this professor that stands up in front of a class and says, I know this and I need to convey it to you and profess it to you. I just get excited when people love finding things out that they didn't know before. As simple as, I didn't know I could study chemistry as a blind person, or wow, I mental map all the time. How can that help me solve complex plumbing problems? I happen to not be great actually sitting down and doing practical work, mechanical work, plumbing work. I'm okay at it, but I'm very good at understanding the system. I'll leave it to my blind friend, Eli Sanchez, you guys have to get on CareerConnect, who's an amazing blind mechanic.
Oh,
But I
good.
can understand plumbing systems and electrical systems, and it's all just using our mind and mental mapping the way we do everything.
Yeah, we have another comment here that says, thank you for saying that about the non-visual, because essentially, we're kind of, you're correct in that we're, failing some of our students by saying, oh, well, we don't think you can do that. And so that's just a thought from an
Interesting.
audience. So
Interesting.
I
And
think
whenever anyone
wait,
tells you you can't do something, I just need to throw this in here. When anyone ever tells you you can't or you shouldn't, if it's what you want to do, just do it.
Yeah.
So there's a
Yeah.
word.
Yeah.
The word is impossible. People have tried that one on me before. It's impossible to think about how you can study chemistry and do your work as a product development person. Like, no, that's impossible. That's what I got told early on in my chemistry career. You know what impossible is? Impossible is I am possible. Remember that. That's what impossible means.
mm-hmm.
If anyone tells you something's impossible, it's not.
Right. That's so true. I think also for our teachers of the visually impaired who may be in our audience tonight, very often
Yeah.
chemistry teachers and other teachers in general try to fall back on the teacher of the visually impaired as the expert. And,
Right.
that's not their job. Their job is to work collaboratively with the classroom
Exactly.
teacher and make the material accessible. You don't have to understand it.
No.
You have to know how to make it accessible.
And if you
And
need a
I think
hand,
that
if
gets
you need a hand
forgotten.
understanding it and working on making it accessible, don't be a stranger. The more people I know, the happier I am.
we have some comments here too, just talking about agreeing with you again about the days of not having technology. And I too think, personally, as Richard said, like, I appreciate the technology now for the most part, but I'm glad I grew up not having it so that I could develop those, for me, those what I call problem solving skills, in the sense of, yes, now I can call Ira if I need to or something, and I
Absolutely.
do. But if I can figure it out on my own, my stubbornness or whatever, I prefer to do that. So
Well,
um
and Katie, let's face it. I think a lot of much younger blind folks than me just call Ira and Be My Eyes whenever they need anything. And they
Yeah.
lose that ability to just get it done themselves.
Yes.
And the analogy that's made there that I make there is that so many college essays this year, talking to my friends in university admissions, were written by ChatGPT.
Mm.
And students aren't really thinking about
Yep.
what they're writing, and they're not
Yes.
learning to put pen to paper.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I'm going to sound really old when I say this, but I think everybody should know how to use a slate and stylus. I carry mine with me, and it's
Yes.
Oh
great.
yeah,
If I need to
it's
take a
essential.
note,
Yeah.
it is.
I
And it
know
might
blind
sound like a horse and
people.
buggy, but guess
Yeah.
what? It's awesome.
Hopi, I don't know if you ever met Catherine Skivers, but she was a big
Oh
mentor
yeah.
to me, and
Oh yeah.
she went through college and she put herself through college with a slate and stylus.
Oh
I
yeah.
need to know Catherine. I have not met her.
Well, she's no longer among us, but back
Oh,
in the
that's
day,
right.
she was equivalent to Jacobus Henbrook and Newell Perry, and those guys
Oh.
for
A great
California
lady.
Council of the Blind, and just amazing
Yeah.
lady.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I think the the learning these skills, like you say, the advocacy part, again, like you mentioned earlier, is so crucial. To be able to take that responsibility to get your hand out, to have those conversations with your professors, with your assistants, with your teachers, because it's a team effort. And the professionals can do their part, but we can also do our part as students, and in the
100%.
workplace, we have to advocate every
100%.
day.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So
Oh, you may
Okay.
cut
Yeah,
out.
no, Katie, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah, we have to advocate every day.
yes.
Yep.
Oh, sorry. I don't know
So-
what's going on with my internet. But we have to advocate every day. And I really want to make one other comment, if you don't mind. And this is
Sure.
one that a lot
Sure.
of folks don't love hearing, but it's the truth. If we want to be successful as blind people living in a sighted world, we have to work harder, and we have to bite the bullet and just do it, and know that, guess what? Days are going to be longer. Studying organic chemistry, I know it far better than my peers, I think, because I spent so much time thinking about it and iterating and making models. But I spent probably 30 hours a week in freshman or sophomore organic chemistry class. It's just studying the material, where I think my peers may have spent 5 or 10. And it just takes longer. It just takes longer. And there's no substitute for elbow grease and just hard work and really, really, really putting your all into something, and just the grit that it takes to earn and achieve whatever it is you want to achieve. We can say positive mindset all day long, and it's true, but without hard work, not much is possible.
Yes, absolutely.
Hoby, you we put in the chat earlier, heard and empowered. What are other ways, or how can people find you if they want to connect with you and learn more about who you are and what you do?
The best way to find me is at my website, my personal website, hobywedler.com. That's HOBYWEDLER.com. Or find me at LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I'm Hoby Wedler on all of those. So I'm easy to find. And don't be a stranger. Reach out anytime.
And
thanks, Katie.
Yeah,
Sure.
any last minute advice to students maybe struggling with chemistry, struggling with advocacy, anything else that maybe they should hear again, or you want to make sure it resonates with our audience, and or to the adults out there who are supporting our youth and tomorrow's leaders?
Parents, teachers.
It doesn't matter whether you're a parent, a student, a teacher, an adult who is blind, who's looking for work. The most important thing we can do is find our superpowers, because we all have gifts. And once we identify the gifts that we have, we can do whatever it is we want to do with those gifts, right? Because those are fun for us. Those are the things we're good at. But along with your gifts, you need to find your passions. What makes you happy? What makes you excited? I love that I can hang my hat on this new formula for peach whiskey. And I know that it's mine. I'll try to get you all samples at some point. But
Thank you.
it's
Yeah.
just fun that I can, it's my passion. Being able to do the things that I love is my passion. So be positive. Don't think everybody's here to serve you. They're not. They're here maybe to help you, but they want to have a good time too. And they're here to learn as well. So don't treat your assistants like all they exist to do is be your reader and be your eyes. They are people just like you and me. They're so much more than just your eyes and your someone to read the stuff to you and someone to tell you what's happening in lab. They're your friends, they're your allies, they're the people that will support you the most. And I have a catchphrase that I like to use all the time, which is educate, don't litigate.
Yeah,
I've heard of
I love
so many situations, unfortunately, where things don't work out right for one reason or another, and people get really frustrated and they start to pull the litigation card. I'm going to sue you if you don't change this for me.
Yeah.
That is the most dangerous card to pull, because it scares everybody to work with us. And it makes it worse for everybody who comes in our footsteps. And when we calmly and kindly and collaboratively educate, we can achieve so much more and so much more positive results. And it's just so much more fun. Don't litigate, don't fight, don't yell, unless you need to. And those circumstances are few and far between, and you'll know when you come across one. But just teach people how to best hang out with you and best interact with you. And life is fun. Don't forget that. If you can laugh about something 6 months from now, laugh about it now. When you're traveling through the airport and the poor person who's helping you through security doesn't know the correct term, doesn't know how to do proper sighted guide, and pushes you through, don't stop the whole thing and yell at them like a crazy person.
Yeah.
Calmly say, hey, this is the best way to guide someone who's blind or visually impaired. Let me show you. Because nobody really, unless they do, and there are a few people that do, but generally speaking, nobody is mean. They just don't know yet.
Yeah.
And it's our job to teach them. And that's the same in chemistry. It's the same in academia. It's the same in everyday life. And here are the three things that I want everybody to remember. And if you take nothing, and I'm talking to teachers, parents, students, adults, anyone, when I say this, I'm talking to Lori, Richard, Katie, everybody around. And here are my three things that, above all, I want you to take away. Number one, we are not alone. We have support in this world. We need to activate that support, and all of us need it, right? Not just you as a blind person. The sighted people who you think of who are assisting you, they need you in many cases just as much as you need them. We are not alone. Number two, you are enough. As the person you are totally enough. As long as you give it your personal best and you know, and you're proud of what you're doing enough. It's good. It's okay. It's good. And number three, this relates to the superpowers. We are all amazing. And I know people say we're amazing for tying our shoes as blind people, and that's not the amazing I mean. We are amazing. We all have something that we're incredible at. Find your superpower and run with it. And don't look back. And above all, be optimistic. Optimism is the power of, gives us the ability to find joy in the most seemingly joyless tasks. So be optimistic, come at life with a positive attitude. My glass is never half empty, it's always half full.
Of whiskey.
That's right. That's right. I wasn't gonna
With-
state the fluid. I was gonna leave that up to the imagination, but Richard
With-
filled it in for me.
Right. Katie, Lori, with about a minute and a half left, any last minute words of wisdom or suggestions?
Oh, I would just like to thank you and great, fabulous presentation.
Thank you guys for inviting me on. It's a huge honor, and I just love the work that APH does. So kudos to you all for what you do and for everybody you support, and thank you.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of comments. People are loving this, and
Oh, nice.
I agree. I mean, this has been great. So thank you for sharing your time with us.